What's up, guys? Welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duns. Today we're studying Acts chapter 28. Let's jump right in.
Okay, so for those of us who've been reading through our plan, today we finished the book of Acts. Now, the book of Acts is a wonderful, wonderful book. So a little earlier, Jeb and I were talking about it right before we even read. And I said, Jeb, what's the book of Acts basically been about? And Jeb, do you remember what you said? What's the book been about so far?
So Paul would go around the world and try to tell people about Jesus, and people were trying to kill him and put him in prison.
Okay. All right. So probably the second half of the book of Acts, that's a perfect summary for it. So at the very beginning, it's all about the Acts of the Apostles inside Jerusalem. And then about halfway through, it shifts to what the Lord did beyond Jerusalem. And you'll find the book of Acts starts with the focus in Jerusalem. Then the focus is in Judea and Samaria. And now we're in kind of this ends of the earth kind of situation. That's the exact pattern that Luke said in chapter 1, verse number 8, where Jesus is talking. He said, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth. And so for us, if Jesus told us that command, we live in Petal, Mississippi. So our Jerusalem would be Petal. Our Judea would be like our surrounding area. Let's say that's the state of Mississippi, and our Samaria would be like Louisiana or Alabama. It's just a little bit outside, next door. And then our ends of the earth would kind of be everywhere. And so that's the pattern that the gospel takes. Now, in Acts chapter number 28, we understand that this is not the end of the Christian story. It's just where Luke ended his message. Now, remember, when we read through this, in chapter 27, Paul was on a boat and it was tossed around and he was in a terrible storm for like 14 days. And finally, the ship wrecked and he shows up on the island of Malta. Now, Malta is a Greek spot. Matter of fact, Malta, just a fun fact, y'all just hold on a sec. Malta is where like Orville's kind of dog breed came from. Oh, Orville is a Maltese, and so so Orville is kind of like a Greek. And so Paul was able to share Jesus in Malta so that they would come to know Jesus. We just don't think that maybe Orville heard about or followed Jesus because Orville's really bad. All right. So one of my favorite stories about Paul comes in this very beginning. So it's where Paul gets off the boat and he's picking up sticks. And what happens to him, Jeb? Do you remember?
A viper bites him.
A viper bites him on the hand. And what would you expect? What did everybody think was going to happen when he got bit by the snake?
He was going to die.
He was going to die. And what did he do? Instead,
he picked it up and threw it in the woods.
He picked it up and he just threw it away. And they thought, well, he didn't die immediately, so let's just watch him. And what did they think was going to happen?
His hand would like swell and he was going to fall.
And he would just fall over dead. But did he?
Nope.
Nope. And so when he didn't, what did they think?
They thought he was a god.
He was a god. Now, it's kind of like when Paul went other places. Who did they think he was?
Zeus.
They did. So he and Barnabas went preaching, and they thought that Barnabas was Zeus and that Paul was Hermes. They thought they were the Greek gods. Well, that kind of seemed to still think this because they're seeing miracles. And what these people had been brought up here, they've been hearing the stories of Hercules, and they've been hearing the stories of Zeus and Ares and Poseidon and all. And so they're hearing about gods that can do miracles, but they've never seen anything. So when they finally see something, they go, this must be it. And Paul every time has to go, whoa, 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 whoa. He said, I am not a god, but I do work for him. And so then he would get to tell him about Jesus. And then he comes along and he heals somebody. But here's what I like out of that story. So have you ever had a bad day?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So what if you had a bad day, or in Paul's case, a couple of weeks of like living through a storm, and then a shipwreck, and then you wash up on an island, and you're cold, and you're wet, and you're cranky. But Paul doesn't seem to he goes and he picks up sticks, which by the way, if I'm cold and cranky and wet and I just washed up on the seashore, I want to just sit and everybody leave me alone. I need a few minutes. But Paul said, hey guys, Let me pick up some firewood and let me try to build us a fire so that we feel better. That sounds a whole lot like Jesus. Like Jesus would have done something like that because he came to be a servant. See, we talk a lot about being servants in this world, but we don't really like to serve. We like to be served. And that's something we have to constantly battle. I like how Paul said, hey, I'll go pick up sticks. I'll build a fire. He also didn't get in a pity party. Like if you've ever had a bad day and it just piles on one after another and you just kind of, I want a pity party. Woe is me. Well, he didn't have that. He was still joyful, which is interesting about this. So Paul is in jail and he's tied to a Roman soldier who they're changing out this soldier every like 6 hours. And he eventually gets to Rome, which he's been wanting to go to Rome for a long time. He didn't really want to go as a prisoner, but, he'll take it whatever he can get. And so he goes there, and what's interesting is they sail on a ship called the Twins, which were Roman gods, they believed, that protected sailors. But these guys had been through so many storms, they knew that these gods were not the ones who protected them. They had been with Paul. They knew there was a real God out there that protected them. And so they knew that. Well, Jim, what was going on with Paul at this moment?
So they were on a boat and so
what did the Jews do to Paul?
They threw him in prison, but instead he rented a house and he had to live with guards.
He did. Now, when the Jews threw Paul in prison, the Jews didn't like him, so they got the Romans to arrest him. And what was the plan of the Jews? Why did they want Paul to go to jail?
So he couldn't tell people about Jesus.
Okay. But everywhere he went, he had a soldier chained to him, changing out every 6 hours. So 24 hours a day, every 6 hours, he's got soldiers. He's got at least 4 different soldiers a day being chained to him, so they can't get very far. He's a nice guy, so instead of throwing him in a dungeon, they let him rent a house. The soldiers have to stay with him, so he didn't try to escape, which he wouldn't have. And then it says that everybody just kept coming to Paul. So he stayed in one house and the whole world came to Paul. Why? Because the world was coming to Rome. There were people coming to Rome for doing business from all over the world. Paul got to go to the ends of the earth by staying in one place, chained down, and people coming to him. And when they came to know Jesus, because he would share the gospel with them, and they went back home, whether they were going to Spain or they were into Asia or Europe or wherever it was, they're going back now as Christians. He's sending missionaries from prison. As a matter of fact, while he's in prison, did you know this? That these 2 years while he's in prison here, this is when he wrote the book of Philippians. It's when he wrote the book of Ephesians. It's when he wrote the book of Colossians. And it's when he wrote the book of Philemon. And this is probably what Paul was talking about in Philippians chapter 1, verse 12, when he says, I want you to know, brothers, that the things which happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel, so that it has become evident to the whole palace guard. Why the whole palace guard? Because they keep sending soldiers in from the palace to watch Paul. So it has become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. So how did they know? Because they were literally having to go be chained to him. And he said, while I have your attention, let me tell you about Jesus. So the Jews' plan was to throw Paul in jail so that he couldn't do what?
He couldn't tell people about Jesus.
All right. But is that what happened?
Nope.
And he actually was able to tell more people. Okay. So this reminds me like the Old Testament story of Joseph. Remember Joseph sold into slavery by his brothers, and he goes into Egypt, and it was bad in Egypt, and he was lied about, and he was thrown in jail, and then he comes out, and he has the dreams, and then he's the governor of Egypt. Then he finally meets his brothers. You remember that story? Here's what he told them. He said, what you meant for evil, God used it for good. So what the Jews meant for evil, God used in the book of Acts for good. This is also one of the things where Paul will write later. He will say, And we know that God works all things together for good for those that love him and are called according to his purpose. Warren Wiersbe said, Luke did not write this book of Acts simply to be the record of ancient history. He wrote it to encourage the church in every age to be faithful to the Lord and to carry the gospel to the ends of the world. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. I hope you've enjoyed learning where you came from. This is where we came from as a church. So tomorrow we get to start the book of Micah. We'll be in the minor prophets, and it's going to be good. So let's look forward to that. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.